Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Atrainability Radio, where I have the pleasure of speaking with Roy Lilley about trying to change attitudes to human error and fallibility across healthcare. I know Roy will be well known to many of you. His blog, NHS Managers Every Day, is enjoyed by tens of thousands. I've been a subscriber for many, many years and have thoroughly enjoyed his insight, often controversial, always thought-provoking and worthwhile. So let's welcome Roy. Well, we'd like to welcome Roy Lilley, the author of the NHS Managers daily blog, which I've always found very interesting. And Roy's given up some time to share his thoughts on how we get it right in the NHS rather than focusing all the time on getting it wrong. So hello, Roy.
Hello, and hello to everybody listening. How do you get it right? I don't know. Flip a coin, I think, and then we flipped a coin, but we couldn't figure out what heads meant. So that's
it. But it is this thing that everyone focuses on when it gets wrong, and the media are as guilty as anyone. A few years ago, I did a webinar with a healthcare journal. And I said to the editor, we're never going to sort this out until people like you stop focusing on blaming people who've got it wrong. Yeah. And he laughed, actually, and he said, not good journalism, old boy. And I kind of wrung his neck, quite honestly.
Well, it is. And, I have trouble with this as well. Quite often I appear on the telly or on radio stations, and generally speaking, people only ever ring me up when something's gone wrong. And it's a very difficult thing to say. But look, today, that we're recording this today, whatever day it is. But the one thing I do know is that about 1 million people go through the health service at one bit or another, the ambulance, the GPs, hospitals, community services, district nurses, whatever. 1 million people will be have their lives touched by the health service. And can I say to you that all those 1 million people will have a fantastic experience and go home happy? Well, the answer to that is no. It won't. Some of them will wait for longer than is reasonable. Some of them will actually have procedures that have gone wrong. Some of them will be seen by people who are tired, exhausted, forgetful, distracted, whatever, because it's people. There are 1.2 million people working in the NHS. There's 1 million patients seen, nearly 1 million seen every day, and of course things will go wrong. In the best of well-run companies, things will go wrong. When it's a measure of the company or the organization, how well and quickly people put things right, and what we learn from what has gone wrong. And that's the great difficulty. Now, if you're 1 in 1 million where things have gone wrong, you don't really want to hear that the rest of us have had a great experience. I get that. But I think there's the issue of perspective, because the NHS isn't cack-handed and it doesn't do everything wrong, and not everyone waits for 12 hours in A&E. The majority of people get seen in a reasonable time and get a reasonable service. But when things do go wrong, it has a potential for things to be catastrophically wrong, because the NHS doesn't mess about at the margins. It does really important stuff to people. Yeah. And when that goes wrong, really important things go wrong. It's a really important problem. But the difficulty is, what do we do about it when things go wrong? Well, we make a meal of it, because the problem with it is that it's the way the whole system is stacked up against being a learning organization, because fundamentally it's an organization that has to be defensive when things go wrong, because it knows it's going to get sued. And so you've got lawyers saying to hospitals, do not admit liability, do not write to the patients, do not apologize. You've got clinicians who are controlled by regulatory bodies like the Nursing and Midwifery Council for Nurses and the GMC, the General Medical Council for Doctors, and all the allied health professionals all have their own regulatory framework, and they have to be registered. And of course, if something goes wrong, they get their registration suspended until there's an investigation and something gets sorted out. So there is all of the infrastructure around mistakes is all stacked against someone saying, excuse me, but can I put my hand up? I've made a mistake here. I've done something wrong, because people will freeze and say, whoa, wait a minute. And I tell you a story. When I was running a hospital, we were looking after mental health patients, and we had a young woman who was a schizophrenic. She was really mentally very ill, and she also had diabetes. And the diabetes was very difficult to manage because the insulin and all the complications that go with it. Anyway, the upshot of it was she had to have her foot removed. And of course, getting consent for someone who is section of the Mental Health Act to have part of getting their foot removed, you have to go through an enormous amount of procedures. Her parents had to be involved in it. Anyway, so she had her foot amputated, and she was in our care, and we had her on a one-to-one watch in the hospital. And anyway, in the middle of the night, 3:00 in the morning, the nurse who was on shift for the one-to-one sitting at the bedside decided she was going to get up and go and have a fag. So she went out and had a fag. And of course, what happened while she was out having a fag, the young lady in question woke up, was completely disoriented, didn't understand what the hell was going on, tried to get out of bed, of course, had a foot missing, fell over and broke her wrist, had a collis fracture of the wrist. And you can imagine all of the aggravation there was over that. Quite reasonably, she was in our care, and this horrible thing had happened. Well, I was the chairman of the hospital at the time, and it was a serious untoward incident. So, I was notified, the chief executive, and we all kind of met up. And I said, you know what? They said, what are we going to? I said, well, I'm going to go and see the parents. I'm going to tell them what's happened. And they said, oh, no, you can't do that because we've got to form region and there's the liability issues and we've got to fill in a form. I said, bugger it, I'm going to see the parents. So I pitched up at the parents' house. I knocked on the door and said, I'm Roy Lilley, I'm the chairman of the hospital. There's been a horrible accident. You know about it. I'm really sorry. And I've just come to say I'm sorry and to talk to you. And they said, well, thanks, come in. We had a cup of tea. I said, the nurse in question has been suspended and there'll be a disciplinary inquiry. It doesn't help you, but, we're on the case and I'm really sorry. And they said, you know what? We don't want the nurse to be disciplined. We just want to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
So I said, well, okay. Well, look, I will have a safety review. Do you want to come on the safety review committee? And they said, yes. So they came on the safety review committee. Anyway, the upshot of that was that we realized there's no such thing as a 1-to-1. It's a 2-to-1. Or even a 3-to-1. You've got to have, nurses got to have breaks. There needs to be buddy systems so they don't sit for more than 2 hours. You have to have a rotation. So we changed all that. And because in the meantime, the serious untoward incident had been reported to the Regional Health Authority. And when they learned that the chairman had been round there and said, I'm really sorry, it was our fault, I was summoned to the Regional Health Authority by the chairman at the time, who was not, let me put it this way, he wasn't sympathetic to me admitting liability. I nearly lost my job. And I said to him, you know what, if you want to sack me, that's fine. I said, but you're sacking me for the wrong reasons, because what I did was right. And if it was your family, that's what you would want. You wouldn't want to be dragged through the courts and lawyers and forms and inquiries. You would want someone to tell you the truth, wouldn't you? And there was a long pause, and he said, you're right. And that for me encapsulates everything that's wrong with the NHS when things go wrong. So what do we do about that? Well, there are other countries that do things very differently. Sweden and New Zealand and one or two other places, they have what they call a no-fault approach. So if something goes wrong, they look after the patient who's been in some way damaged or aggrieved. They look after the relatives and they say, look, whatever it takes, we will put this right. The question of liability is then dealt with separately through the professional bodies, and whether or not the clinician concerned gets disciplined or supported or education or whatever is dealt with as an entirely different matter. It's nothing to do with the patient. It's nothing to do with the relatives. What they focus on is putting it right for the relatives. Now, I quite like that. One of the other complications we got here is, I should explain, is why people who go to court get millions of pounds of compensation. Why is the compensation so high? Well, the reason for that is the NHS was born on the 5th of July 1948. In 1950s, some further legislation was passed because parliamentarians were saying, well, look, okay, we've got the NHS. What happens if the NHS does something wrong? How do we put that right? And the argument at the time was, well, if the NHS has made a mistake, people won't want their mistake put right by the NHS. So the courts then decided that all compensation would be measured against the cost of it being provided privately. So
there's a kind of an irony there, isn't there, Roy? Because if you have a problem in a private healthcare provider, it tends to be the NHS which sorts that out.
Yes, it is. And there have been some recent cases where the private sector have had clinicians who behave badly. And of course, they've tried to duck liability by saying, well, actually, the clinician doesn't work for us. We just rent him the space and rent him the operating theatre.
Practicing privileges, yes.
Yeah, and now there's a big row going on about whether or not the private providers should be legally liable for the performance of the clinicians. My own view is I think they should, but of course the liability insurance would go through the roof, and maybe a lot of the private sector wouldn't be able to provide that. So, that's why the compensation claims are so high. People often say to me, is it because we've got no win, no fee lawyers? And I don't think it is. I mean, frankly, I think if working people, are damaged by the NHS, they're entitled to the best possible legal advice they can get, and of course one might be out of their reach financially, and if people are going to do it on a no win no fee, why not? That's not the issue. The issue is, we've got to try and stop the NHS making mistakes, and when it does, we've got to figure out what we learn.
Yeah, and I think that is exactly, that's what we're trying to do. We try to help people understand how mistakes happen. In other words, like how you can miss something right before your eyes, or how you can make an assumption, like the anaesthetist we came across who'd gone from theatre to intensive care, critical care, and given a 10 times ketamine overdose because they assumed that the ketamine file was the same dosage in critical care as it was in theatre, and it wasn't, and they just didn't.
Yeah, well, there you are. You see, you can design that out.
Yeah.
You can design it with the packaging of the drugs. There's all kinds of things. I mean, you have a background in the airline industry, and of course, we look to the airline industry as being the lead on matters of safety. And Matthew Syed wrote his book in the Black Box or Red Box. Funny enough, I interviewed him when we talked at length about this, because I argued with him that actually there was no parallel between the airline industry and the NHS, because the airline industry is staffed by people in the plane who want to get home safely as much as the people in the back want to get home safely. And it's different in the NHS, because if a surgeon does something wrong and somebody's injured or dies, they still go home. So I don't think the parallel is, I think it's casually made. I don't think it sticks.
I would challenge that slightly, because having done 34 years as a commercial pilot with, at some point, 400 people sitting right behind me, all I can say is you don't actually consciously think about them when you're flying the plane. Sometimes you open the door and you see, oh my God, there's 400 people out there. Yeah. And that's a bit daunting. Or when you have to walk into the terminal and either apologize for the landing, we didn't land, we were shot down, or something like that. But what it is, Roy, because I've thought about this a lot, is I think it goes in the training in the first place. So, if you don't buy into safety-related behavior, you don't get a license. You don't graduate from flight school. So it's not quite as simplistic as the fact that, well, actually, I've always liked the joke about we're like the doctors and pilots are like the two critters that have an input into the standard English cooked breakfast. But they're more like the chicken. They get to walk away. The pilots are more like the pig,
It's like, is it the chicken or the egg? It depends if you're having breakfast or supper.
Yeah, but it's so the point about it is, I think it's more to do with they're both related to risk management. Clearly, that's what it's all about. But it's also about an attitude to personal fallibility. So obviously, I've never been trained as a doctor, but I'm told if you're trained as a healthcare professional, you're told that you mustn't make mistakes, and there's an implication that you're a bad person if you do.
Yes, I think yes. There's a lot in that. There's no question. Now, I think that the doctors now, the cadre doctors that we've got coming through, and I hear the younger doctors, I think their attitude is different. Funny enough, I interviewed Shafi Ahmed a couple of nights ago, and he's the surgeon who's done the Google glasses, and when he operates, he broadcasts live on Twitter the operations. He's the most viewed surgeon in the world, apparently. And he was talking about the attitude to his junior doctors. That when he was learning to be a surgeon, he tells this horrendous story of being an on-call he was a junior. He wasn't even a registrar, I don't think, and he was on call in A&E, and a guy came in with peritonitis, which is an inflammation of an infection of the appendix, and it's very dangerous. It can kill you unless you sort it out. But this guy presented all the symptoms, and so he knew that the patient needed to be operated on. It was about 3:00 in the morning, so he rang the consultant surgeon on call, and he said, "There's a guy here who's presented with peritonitis. He needs an operation." So the consultant said, "Well, go on then, off you go. And I've got every confidence. You've seen enough of them now. It's time for you to do it." And put the phone down. And so he did this operation. He said, I didn't sleep for days afterwards in case I'd done something wrong. But that was his baptism of fire. That was how he did it. Now, these days, that would never happen. But that was how it happened, 20 years ago. And it's certainly not right, and I'm not advocating it, but I think we had the wrong approach to all that. But now we've got the World Health Organization checklist, which is something that has been copied from the airline industry, I think, really, because you have checklists before you fly.
But they still don't understand it, I don't think, Roy. There's an awful lot of people where they pay lip service to it. And so,
well, that's the criticism of checklists, isn't it? That if you do them so often enough, you just flip through them and don't do them properly.
Yeah, but as you know, probably from when you were with the Cessna that we were talking about earlier, that I've got the checklist with me when I fly now on a little single engine thing. Yeah. And I just won't go near it without getting the checklist out. Now this bit about I will die if I forget something becomes very realistic, very pragmatic.
It does. I mean, when I was taught, that's just the way you're taught. That's the way you do it, isn't it?
Yeah. And if you don't get it, you don't get a license. It's just, and I think there's got to be something about this attitude to fallibility. In other words, humility without hubris, I think, is probably the way to go.
That's a lovely phrase, actually. I like that. And then, of course, the other, I should pinch that. I guess the other thing that really, before we get too gloomy about the number of mistakes we make, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff going on.
Well, that's where I wanted to focus. Is the how do we move away from blame to what some people are already trying, like Suzette Woodward and whatever, about learning from excellence. And if I can just run it by you. So my point, when I use this on training courses a lot, and I say, do you have a debrief at the end of a day? And most people go, yeah, of course we do. I said, what, in detail? So what if nothing's gone wrong? And they go, well, we just say, thanks ever so much, Roy. Nice working with you today. And I said, okay, but have you ever thought to say, actually, Roy, thanks so much. It was great when you pointed that out and stopped me doing the other. And of course, they don't. And
no, that's
what
right.
They do is they will debrief, hopefully, when something's gone wrong. But let's, for the sake of argument, say that happens 1% of the time. So what that means is they only talk about something in detail 1%, and 99% of the time when it's gone well, they just say, thanks a lot, nice working with you, bye. And they don't pull it apart. And in fact, people don't accept praise, I find. So if you say to a nurse, thanks ever so much, great working with you today, just doing my job. And that's what you get. Just doing the job.
It's a horrible generality to say this, but if you've got a consultant doing a list in a hospital somewhere, and he's got a private clinic to do across the other side of town, he's going to finish the list, say thanks very much everybody, and clear off and get on with his private list. And of course, the other interesting thing about that is airline pilots can only fly, I think, for about 2,000 hours a year. Lorry drivers can't drive for more than 9 hours a day. But nurses and doctors can work as many shifts as they like round the clock if they want to. Maybe we should start thinking about there is the European Working Time Directive for junior doctors, but a consultant can have a list in an NHS hospital and then go and do a list in a private hospital. In fact, if anybody's ever had private care, if you look back, I bet you'll find that most of it was either in the evenings or weekends, because that's when they get on a moonlight. That's when
I met a guy a long time ago at the Royal College of Surgeons. And he was laughing, and he said, I've just been and treated a private patient. And the chap said to me, have you been working all day in the NHS? And I said, yes, of course, I've done a full day. And he said, hang on a minute, I'm paying you to do the private work, and you're actually tired and exhausted at the end of having done a full day already. How can that be right? I thought that's an interesting attitude.
Yeah, for just focusing on excellence. I mean, one of the things that we've tried to do is to focus people on sharing their best practice and their best ideas. And
the Academy of Fab Stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's why we started. I mean, I'll tell you quickly the story of why we started the Academy of Fabulous Stuff. There was a hospital over in Colchester that got itself into trouble. Cancer therapy, chemotherapy, and so on, that has to be given at certain windows, 35 days and 65 days. I think if you're a cancer expert and you're listening to this, forgive me, but in general, there are 2 windows where it has to be given. Anyway, to cut a long story short, it was discovered that some patients actually hadn't been given their chemotherapy at the appropriate time, and 3 people died. We don't know whether they died because they were sick and they would die anyway, or they died because they didn't get the chemotherapy. Anyway, the police were called, and the chief executive of the hospital, who was a doctor, funny enough, and a very good chief executive, he said, look, I'm responsible for this. I'm not culpable, but I'm responsible, so I'll resign. So he fell on his sword. The chairman went as well. The hospital was in a mess for a long time. Anyway, what happened? Well, the hospital was expecting a review from the Care Quality Commission, the CQC. They realised they were in a mess with their chemotherapy. So some managers somewhere, knuckleheads, decided they would falsify the records to make it look like they were up to date, and they weren't. And, when I said, well, what turns educated, articulate, professional people with a strong sense of vocation into crooks? Well, the answer was the CQC, because they were all terrified of being inspected. And, any student of management knows that inspection is no way of getting quality into the system. You've got to build it in. Even going back as far as good old Edward Deming in the 60s, the godfather of management gurus, he said in his 14 points of management, you can't inspect quality into anything. You've got to build it in. Yeah. So I said at the time, and I was speaking at a conference about this, and I don't know why I said it, but I just kind of said, there's no repository of best practice. Wouldn't it be good if someone could ring up, I don't know, let's call it the Academy of Fabulous Stuff, and say, we've got problems with our chemotherapy. Has anybody else got a problem? And they'd say, yeah, there's 3 hospitals had the same problem. This is how they fixed it. Go and talk to them, and boom, you've got a solution. And I got off the stage, and somebody came up to me and said, you know what, Roy, you should do that. Keep that name because it's wacky and it suits you, the Academy of Fabulous Stuff. So I did, and I met a fantastic specialist nurse, Dr. Terry Porritt, who's now the director of the Academy of Fabulous Stuff. She was running a website at the time for specialist nurses, a portal of best practice. I liked what she was doing. So anyway, we designed the website, and off we went. Funnily enough, we had our 5th birthday just the other day on Valentine's Day. It was our 5th birthday.
Very appropriate.
Yeah, it was. We started it on Valentine's Day deliberately for that reason. And now we're just about to start in Australia. It's going to be in Canada. We get about 2,000 hits on the website a day. We get 4 or 5 really great ideas shared every day. And it's become, the repository of best practice. And
should we put a plug in for the address? So it's www.fabnhsstuff.net.
Thank you for that. The money's in the post. Well done. Thank you. The check's in the post. Yeah. No, but thank you for that. It is. It's based on actually a piece of sound management theory. In any organisation, there's a line of performance. The mean performance is called, and below that performance is negative deviance, and above it is positive deviance. Yeah. And the CQC and regulators go around looking for negative deviance. They look for things that are wrong. If you look for things that are right, it's 30 times more motivation than negative deviance. Now, positive deviance is defined as people who, given the same circumstances and the same resources facing the same challenges, there will be some people who find a solution. And that's called positive deviance. And so we look for the positive deviance, and we ask people to share best practice. We've had everything from simple things like twiddle muffs for people who have got dementia, right through to organising theatre lists, getting flow through A&E, cardiac stuff, sepsis. I mean, it's a whole raft of stuff, and it's just gone boom, really. And I'm rather pleased it has. But it's still the only repository of best practice that I know of anywhere, in any healthcare system anywhere.
Have any of the Royal Colleges sort of linked into it at all, Roy? Or
yes, we have run campaigns. Some we've done some stuff with the Royal College of GPs. We've done stuff with the Royal College of Psychiatry. At the moment, we're working with the NHSI, who are faced with the problem. They've got to produce this people plan, which has been delayed because of the budget and the election and all this.
Yes.
They've got a real problem on their hands because, at the time of recording this, yesterday the government released details of its point system, which is not especially helpful actually for getting staff here, because it takes forever to train staff. It takes it takes 3 years to train a nurse, longer for just about everyone else, and a doctor. It's the life cycle of a family dog before they're trained. And so they are concentrating on being better employers and looking after people better. And we're running a campaign with them at the moment called Workforce Wizards, where we're promoting best practice. Some hospitals are doing some really great stuff. Milton Keynes Hospital is one that comes to mind. They're doing some terrific stuff on being a better employer. So there's all of that going on. There's a lot of stuff going on that's good.
That's really good. And I think you also wrote a book about dealing with difficult people, did you not, some while back?
I did. That was a little book I wrote. It must be 10 years now. It's in the fourth edition. I've sold 300,000 copies worldwide, and I think it's the title really that sells it, dealing with difficult people, because we've all got difficult people. I just hope that when people buy it, the content lives up to the cover. But I've been lucky with that book.
300,000 says a lot. The reason I mention it is you're just talking about immigration and bringing people in to help the NHS work. And over the years, we've done an awful lot of work with the SAS doctors, the staff grade and associate specialists. And the single sort of human factors subject that they ask for more than any other is dealing with difficult colleagues.
Yeah.
And it is so disappointing. And, it also links back to, you were mentioning the now facing jail breast surgeon who caused some ruptions recently. People knew about that guy, and apparently he was, shall we say, a challenging character, I'm told. No one did anything about it.
No, if you know anything about operating theatre procedures, you will know that the right thing to do is, before the patient is wheeled in, they have a case conference. If there are any images, they're displayed on the light wall, scans or whatever. The notes will be available. The lead person will say, right, we're going to operate on a male age 30, and he's got to have his, whatever done. These are the images. This is, what I expect to do. This is the procedure I'm going to go along, and okay, let's wheel him in and let's get going. And the anaesthetist, will have done the bit about the body weight and the right gas and stuff or whatever it is they use, and off they go. So everyone knows what they're doing. So then you're left with the question, well, how did this guy end up doing breast sections for cancer on people who didn't have cancer? I mean, if they'd have stuck to the procedures, they'd have said, here's the image, here's the x-ray of the scan, here's the cancer, and this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to make the incision here along Langer's lines and, do what I'm going to do. So what happened? If they'd have followed the procedure, none of this would have happened. He would have just said, oh, well, I've seen this patient. I don't propose going through the notes. I know that I've got to do a section on her left breast. And everyone said, yes, doctor. Yeah. And then, of course, when they got in there and there was no cancer or whatever, I don't know what they said. I mean, the other thing is that if you cut something out of a person, it's reserved, it's what they call reserved, put to one side, and it goes for histopathology. It is examined. So how he ended up doing sections on people without cancer, without histopathology coming back saying, you've sent us 10 of these and they haven't got cancer, what's going on? God alone knows. But you're right. I don't know whether it was a conspiracy of silence or a conspiracy of fear, but something, it'll come out in the inquiry, but there's something horribly wrong. And now there's another one that's presented for another surgeon that's been working in the private sector has done a whole load of, his specialty was shoulders, and he's done a whole load of shoulder operations that didn't need to be done. So God knows what's going on.
Do you know my good friend Chris Turner, who runs the Civility Saves Lives campaign?
I don't know him, but I've heard about his campaign, and I think it's very good. Yeah,
he's a great guy, and I'm hoping to do a podcast with him in the near future. I've known Chris for quite a while now, and it is such a simple idea that basically, being polite, being, shall we say, professional. So I'm back to trying to look on the positive side here, rather than looking at the negativity, and just being civil, I think, is phenomenal. I mean, I've been to GP this week, and some of my previous experiences with GPs, I had one that said, "Oh, please come in, Mr. Dale," and actively looked away, actually broke eye contact as she shook my hand. And the one this week was quite the reverse, and it was the little things that, I was really struck by. Is she engaged? She listened. And at the end of it, I need a very minor procedure to get something removed, debrided. And she actually took me to the office to make sure that the appointment was registered to have the simple procedure done. Rather than, I'll deal with it, off you go. And looking at those little things like that, which people could go, I could do that. I kind of get that.
It is. We at the Academy, Academy of Fabulous Stuff, we have a number of sayings. One of them is start with the patient and work backwards. And the other thing is the little things are the big things. The theory behind that is the closer you get to a little thing, the bigger it is, and it's a big issue for a patient. But Dave, what have you got there? You've got a doctor that's trying to grind through a morning list of about 30 people. They're up against it time wise. They really don't want to make small talk. They just want to. It's like a conveyor belt. You come in. What have you got? A lump. Okay, let's have a look at it. Okay, let's get rid of it. Thanks very much. We'll let you know when you can come in and have it cut off. I mean, you don't really need all of that other stuff, do you? But of course, you do need all of that other stuff, because that's what makes the interaction. And we talk a lot about kindness. I think kindness is really important.
I think it was one of your other blogs very recently was focusing on kindness, and I just, it really did strike a chord with me, Roy. I think you absolutely hit it right there. But I tell you what, and I think we ought to think about wrapping this up maybe. But where I think kindness and compassion starts in healthcare is often with the healthcare professional themselves. Because a lot of them are awfully hard on themselves if they make some kind of mistake. And it's one thing I've said to people a lot is, be a bit kinder to yourself. It's not that being human is an excuse for mediocrity at all, but what it should be is at least a motivation for understanding if something's gone wrong, how it went wrong. And the corollary, of course, is if you got something right, it wasn't just by accident. It was because, hopefully it's because you understood what right looked like and you could do it again and again.
Yeah, exactly. Everything you do is worth a review because the good is as important as the bad.
That's a nice little rhyme as well. I like that.
Yeah. If we can't learn from what we do, then we're in a bad shape.
We are indeed. Roy, I think we've talked about a lot there, and maybe we'll do this again because I really value your input, and your knowledge base is so wide, way more than mine. Mine's very specific. I've stood in operating theatres, I've stood in maternity delivery suites, watched and observed and tried to encourage people with coaching as much as I can, particularly emphasising on what they do well and what they do right, but yours, you have a lot to offer there, a lot of deep knowledge.
Well, it's kind of you to say so. I guess it's one of the benefits of being around a long time. But so I used to come to work, on the number 57 bus with Florence Nightingale, and we shared sandwiches in the canteen.
Well, I'm only 5 years behind you. I'm not.
It's great to talk to you. I hope people have enjoyed listening to our conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you very much, Roy, and I hope to see you soon. And thanks so much, Roy. All the best.
Take care.
Now. Bye. You can find the show notes for this episode of Atrainability Radio at www.atrainability.co.uk. And within those show notes, you can find links and other useful resources. Please do help to spread the word about Atrainability Radio. Tell a friend about the show, colleagues, and if you've not already done so, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. So until next time, thanks for listening. I have been and I remain Trevor Dale, and this has been Atrainability Radio.